In the last video, Red talked about the core problem in fighting game story mode by comparing Mortal Kombat cutscene heavy story with Street Fighter's RPG-like format. But I want to continue on this topic in a different direction. Instead of looking at video game story mode, let's just look at the single player aspect of fighting game in general, which I think we can all agree is lacking in 99% of fighting game. But I will go even further and say that fighting game single player doesn't work on a fundamental level. Let me explain. What do I mean by single player fighting game cannot work? Well, it all have to do with AI and frame data. Don't worry, it's really easy to understand. First, let's quickly explain what frame data is. Frame data are linked to animation in game. There are 4 different types of frame data. Startup, which is when you're about to attack. Active, which is when you are doing the attack. And then you have recovery on hit or on whiff, which is how long it takes for the character to get back to neutral, which is when the player can control the character. So with that out of the way, how come this influences fighting games so much that single player mode doesn't work at all, but other game like shooter or racing game can pull it off? Well, it's because of how tight frame data matter in fighting game compared to, let's say, a shooter. Okay, so how do fighting game work? Every of your move has startup, active, and recovery frame, right? And depending on those moves, you can choose your best option. A move that takes a lot of time to start might not be the best move to dish out at any moment. You need to time it right, but a faster move is more reliable. So it's all about using the right move for the right situation depending on the frame data of the move. But did you know that the average human can only react at something that is around 14 frame or more? Which means that if a move startup is lower than 14 frame, it is unreactable. Which is why most action games have enemy with attack speed higher than 14 frame for you to react. But the average fastest move in most fighting games is the jab, which is in general from 8 to 10 frame of startup. 99% of fighting games have that. Which means that if someone jab you, you cannot block it on react, you need to predict it. So this is a classic setup. If I am in your face in Street Fighter and you want to block my attack to punish me right after, what will you do? Well, you will start to block before my attack, because you can't react to a jab. So to avoid damage, you need to be prepared to block first. But if I decide to do a move that is around 10 frame or less, like let's say a grab, you can't react to it either. With that said, how do you block a grab? You can't. To stop a grab, you need to either do a grab at the same time or a jab. So what do you do then in this situation? Do you block hoping I was going to jab? Or do you jab because you thought I was going to grab? If you block and I grab, I win. If you punch and I block, I win. If you grab and I punch, I win. All that must happen in less than a second. So what, fighting game are just game where you just throw attack at random hoping to just win? So it's just a game about luck? Well, no, because this is where the mind games come in. Fighting game is all about mind games. After all, you're fighting a human, and humans are creatures of habit. So if I keep grabbing you every time I get close, you will eventually understand that this is all I'm doing. So you will try to counter it by jabbing, but boom, I block. This is called conditioning. Another good example would be if you have a move that leads into a 50-50 setup, which is when your move leads to your opponent having to choose between 2 blocking options. Kinda like the grab and jab situation, but instead you are forced to choose between blocking low and blocking high. So what do you do? How do you block? What is the thought process here? Well, when you do this move, most of the time there's one of the 2 options that is more powerful. For example, if Batman do 2 punch in Injustice, he can do an overhead move that lead into a combo. Or he can do a low move that lead into nothing. Most players will want to avoid receiving the most damage, right? So he will block the move that does more damage. But if the other player pick up on that, he can use this against him, doing the less damaging option, winning the mind game. And this is just scratching the surface of the mind game going on. There is much, much more. You see how tricky this is? Now the problem in single player lie with how the AI in fighting game work. Most games use pattern for its enemy. In Dark Souls, different enemy type have different pattern, and player need to adjust to their pattern to win, which is how most single player game work. But in fighting game, you can't make an enemy with a pattern without sacrificing the core of fighting game, because pattern mean that you know what is going to happen, which goes against the mind game. Using enemy with pattern in fighting game can help you understand a game mechanic in the context of a story mode, but it isn't a good representation of what a fighting game is. So single player fighting game don't use pattern, instead they use AI that try to make it feel like a real fighting game match. AI don't have the brain of a human and is immune to conditioning and have a much faster reaction time. So to simulate human mistakes, it starts to work at random. Block and attack randomly. The more you up the difficulty, the more the AI is accurate in its attack and defense. But you see, the problem here is that you can't condition the AI. The AI is just random, which means that if you can't rely on the information you gain during battle to find the best option to win, well, in a game like that, you're essentially playing at random too. You're just doing whatever until you win. And the fighting game, the battle of mind between human beings, become nothing more than a slot machine. Like, don't get me wrong, I have fun with certain single player fighting game like Injustice where you grind gears, but I never really feel like I'm playing a fighting game in single player mode, because the mind game is never here. But that doesn't mean game developers should stop trying, which lead us back to Red's fighting game story mode video. If you didn't watch it already, go watch it. It explored 2 different types of fighting game story mode. I think it's really interesting. You can also like, comment and subscribe if you want to help, and check out our other stuff. With that said, peace out.
Take me back to a place where I felt at home. Take me back to a day when we weren't alone. Take me back to an age when the world felt small. Way back before we blew it all. Take me back to a place where I felt at home. Take me back to a day when we weren't alone. Take me back to an age when the world felt small. Way back before we blew it all. Too many things going on, I can't keep track of them all. From people dropping